I hope you're all energized by that wonderful meal. Can we give thanks by applause to all those who fixed this meal? Delicious. As a vegetarian, I especially appreciated delicious. Now, we have a wonderful after-lunch treat here. This is your dessert, food for the mind and heart of some extraordinary individuals who've been working on this for some time. And again, the bios you'll have in the larger form online. But we're going to begin this discussion of energy ethics. We know we're in this largest transition in human history from non-renewables to renewables, from fossil fuels to fuels that are sustainable. But in between that transition is a huge movement towards energy ethics. And I want to give a shout out to someone we'll hear from in a little bit, and that's Al Gore, who's here, and we're so happy you're here with us. Thank you. But the shout out is in particular because yesterday at Yale, last night, Frances Beinecke, the former head of NRDC, National Resources Defense Council, gave an extraordinary talk, and she's leading a series of lectures this semester as a scholar in residence because she's retired from NRDC. And she did such a great job of what the environmental movement didn't do and is now trying to do on climate change. But she began by saying, after Al Gore's movie, Inconvenient Truth, 2008, things changed. It was, we all know, a tsunami of change. And we can't say thanks enough, but what Frances said, Frances Beinecke, one of the major leaders in the US on the environment, was she said, Al also came and worked with many of the green groups to get them up to speed. But what she underscored was, she said, Al said, this is no longer a political issue, this is a moral issue. And Al has been saying that a long time. He, like us, has been influenced by Thomas Berry, who was also saying that for a long time. But Al put that on the agenda many, many years ago, that this is a moral issue. So this particular panel is addressing that moral issue. Namely, we need an energy ethics. Who would have thought of that 20 years ago? Human ethics and so on. Yes, we now know environmental ethics are expanding and exploding for the whole Earth community, and that is the transition we're in the midst. So we have people who are thinking about this theologically, we have people who are working on the ground, investing, we have an indigenous perspective here, also from law, a wonderful lineup. So we're going to begin first with Erin Lothes, who is a friend and colleague in this work for many years, a theologian at the College of St. Elizabeth. She has done a singular paper on energy ethics out of a group working with the Christian Theological Society, the Catholic Theology Society. And she also has a book coming out from Orbis this coming year on how communities are doing this on the ground, which is going to be a fabulous contribution to our work. So Erin, please take it away.
Well, thank you, Mary Evelyn, for that warm introduction, and thank you to Donnel and Betty. I'm so pleased that we're here together addressing this august and passionate group. Thank you, Karenna, for your work at the Center for Earth Ethics, for Union, for your long history of stellar climate leadership, and for all of you here who are such leaders and activists, from Mr. Gore to all of us who have been colleagues for a long time. It's a real privilege to be here. So I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak about energy ethics. And this is topic that I think the previous panel demonstrates conclusively that we need, because our energy actions, our energy decisions impact other people, and therefore energy decisions are ethical decisions because they have an impact on people, the planet, our ecosystems. And it is an exciting time to begin pondering a new paradigm, a developing paradigm of energy ethics. And this is a global and an interfaith and a planetary paradigm. And I've been asked to speak to some Catholic contributions to that emerging paradigm of energy ethics. And in this year, we are all so incredibly excited about the #1 new text in energy ethics, Pope Francis' Laudato Si, this stellar work, which is creating so much work for us all. It's making us all breathless, but that is wonderful, an enormous gift. And this is an astounding document. It's so comprehensive. It's a profound critique of culture, economics, technology, politics, but it's also a deeply compassionate and spiritual call to ecological conversion. So I would like to discuss 4 sources from Catholic energy ethics contributing to this new paradigm. The first is Laudato Si. The second is a Vatican text called Energy, Justice, and Peace, a reflection on energy in the current context of development and environmental protection. The third is a perhaps less well-known document from the global bishops to the Lima conference last year. And the fourth is the energy ethics paper to which Mary Evelyn referred, of which I'm lead author, but which is a collaborative document created by 10 theologians and ethicists working together to discuss how energy decisions are ethical decisions. So first of all, I'd like to discuss how they are comprehensive, radical, analytical, and ethical. So Laudato Si is our comprehensive document, but I'd like to point to key paragraphs that relate to fossil fuels and renewable energy that stand out in this. We may all be familiar with them. Paragraph 23, the climate crisis is aggravated by a model of development based on intensive fossil fuels. Paragraph 26, there's an urgent need to develop policies to limit emissions and substitute for fossil fuels. And 165, fossil fuel technology needs to be replaced progressively without delay. I'd like to highlight paragraph 52, emphasizing the responsibility of developed nations. It reads, the developed nations ought to help pay their ecological debt by significantly limiting their consumption of non-renewable energy and by assisting poorer countries to support policies and programs of sustainable development. The poorest areas and countries are less capable of adopting, developing, and funding these new models for reducing environmental impact. So what paragraph 52 of Laudato Si states briefly is amplified by this 2013 text, Energy, Justice, and Peace, which comes from the Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace. This document analyzes the relationship of energy to established themes of Catholic social teaching, such as solidarity, rights to health and development, participation, the option for the poor, and the rights of future generations. It expresses the new paradigm of energy ethics by calling for new behavioral patterns based on justice, responsibility, altruism, subsidiarity, and the conception of the integral development of peoples with a view to the common good. So perhaps the most trenchant recommendation in this text comes from the insistence that energy should primarily solve the shortages of the most vulnerable and poorer populations, and only subsequently ensure greater consumption for those of us who have plenty of energy. And the policy recommendation that follows is the uncompromising insistence that advanced countries have a moral duty of using complex energy technologies to limit and reduce their demand for energy sources that are easier to use, fossil fuels. Poorer countries will then have greater access to these sources. Advanced countries have the moral duty of developing these complex and capital-intensive energy technologies so that poorer countries can feed their own development with the simpler and less expensive technologies. So Beyond then reserving fossil fuels for the necessary development needs of poorer countries, which is reserving those easier to use and less expensive fossil fuels for livelihood emissions. And this is a critical distinction in energy ethics between livelihood emissions and luxury emissions, right? So going beyond that, that third source for energy ethics, the Global Bishop Statement sent to the Lima conference last year, makes an even more radical call. And it's so refreshing. We're getting used to it, but it's so refreshing to get really radical calls from Catholic leaders in these wonderful ways. And the Lima Statement calls on the world to protect communities suffering from the impacts of climate change, to keep the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, to end the fossil fuel era, and to move to 100% renewables. So it's a 4-page, astonishing short text. And this radical call is rooted not only in a firm commitment to solidarity, but a recognition of how energy intersects all forms of social, economic, technological, and political globalization. So we are now hearing a call for moral globalization, which actualizes the values of justice and solidarity. And these values, shared by so many traditions represented here, express the consistent and cumulative message of Catholic social teaching. And with Laudato Si', some are starting to speak of a third wave of Catholic social teaching, that the first wave is the labor-industrial critique of the earliest encyclicals, a second wave focusing on international development and justice, and now we're seeing a third wave with an ecological social message. And central to that teaching is the ethical imperative. So Laudato Si', paragraph 169 states, reducing greenhouse gases requires honesty, courage, and responsibility. It also requires criteria for assessing our choices and actions on the way forward. And this is what an energy ethic aims to supply. So the ethical imperative to act, to make judgments and decisions at all levels of society, from individuals to local groups to regional communities to global authorities, that is the focus of the co-authored paper, Catholic Moral Traditions and Energy Ethics for the 21st Century. This paper is available online. It was published by the Journal of Moral Theology and was reviewed extensively by multiple scientists and policy experts before it was peer-reviewed by the journal. This paper seeks to emphasize that energy decisions are ethical decisions, and it aims to create conversations about energy ethics. So toward that end, we've created an executive summary, because I'm under no illusions that people will read all 35 pages of it. So there's an ethical summary and an ethics summary, written in more of a faith tone for church communities. It's also, those summaries are also in Spanish. So our paper came out 10 days before the encyclical, which could not have been anticipated because it was a 3-year project. We developed it as part of a 3-year task force with a defined endpoint in 2015. But anticipating paragraph 52, we concur that, quote, significant responsibility and leadership must fall to the developed nations who have already benefited from the exploitation of fossil fuel resources. And our paper emphasizes the limited carbon budget that remains. According to the calculations we cite, assuming annual emissions do not change from what they were in 2008, we have a limited carbon budget, and our contention is that the conventional fossil fuels must be directed towards building a clean energy infrastructure. So at the rate of emissions, assuming they don't change from 2008, and are calculated on a global per capita basis, which of course is not how they are emitted, right? The United States emits far more, but assuming they were emitted on this just per capita basis, the United States' carbon budget would be exhausted in about 6 years. So we have that time to build a renewable energy infrastructure. And doing so is an expression of the 7 principles that are developed in this paper. These principles are taken from an early document from the United States Bishops, a 1981 letter, Reflections on the Energy Crisis, which was written in a much different time in the context of peak oil. But nonetheless, it conveyed 6 enduring moral principles. These are cherishing and protecting life as a gift from God, accepting an appropriate share of responsibility for the welfare of creation, living in solidarity with others for a common good, namely the sustainability of an abundant earth, striving for justice in society, giving special attentions to the needs of the poor and members of minority groups, and widespread participation in decision-making. And we have added a 7th principle, which is technological prudence, and we certainly see that Laudato Si has amplified that theme enormously. The body of our paper addresses current energy realities in light of these principles, and so we look at fossil fuels as energy of the past. We look at nuclear and natural gas as energies of the present, transitional energies that need to be phased out on a monitored timeline, and that the energy of the future is renewable energy. And because renewable energy is needed at an enormous scale, if carbon emissions are to be minimized by 2030, or even eliminated, this requires a revolution in the political and economic valuation of fossil fuels, as well as concentrated civic and international efforts to achieve this transition. And we pray that Pope Francis is accelerating this transition. So a critical leap in making the transition to what we call the energy of the future, a low-carbon world, requires, as was discussed this morning, both disinvestments in fossil fuel energy structure and increased investments in renewable energies. And the costs of this shift have been assessed at between 2% and 6% of GDP. So it's comparable to the Apollo project. This is something we can do. So as Bishop Mario Toso of the Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace has said, the realization of peace requires that energy be thought of, produced, distributed, and used according to a new paradigm. And central to that new paradigm is assessing economic cost in tandem with social cost. So social cost is a complex category, but it must be further studied and highlighted as an essential part of authentic and just energy calculations. And protecting the values of life, human health, dignity, and participation in decision-making requires the full accounting of social costs and of externality pricing. We must also analyze very clearly the ways that structural sin is incentivized within our socioeconomic status quo, and articulate the way energy's structural issues connect to our personal responsibilities as individuals and communities. American residents and all citizens of superdeveloped nations are particularly called upon to assess what solidarity means today, particularly with regard to the valuation of profit over life or ecosystemic integrity. Everyone makes energy decisions within his or her sphere of influence, and the aim of our paper is to insist that these energy decisions are ethical decisions. As a future horizon in the developing paradigm of energy ethics, criteria may come from the body of just war theory, which is a suggestive and appropriate realm, calling us to account for the full costs of the collateral damage of what fossil fuels create. And it gives us very precise and useful categories for analysis, such as proportionality and discrimination. So we look at how are non-combatants, how are the innocent who stand by affected by energy decisions, and how can we balance the benefits and burdens in the most global and fair way. So as we build a global energy ethic, many of our faith traditions agree that genuine human flourishing is not simply a technical or a political question. It requires a spiritual recognition of our shared existence in the one human family, in our one common home. It calls for a religious response and an ethical transformation. So we are fighting a war, and it is time for revolution, and we can see many signs of hope. In April, Bloomberg News stated that the race for renewable energy has passed a turning point. and the world is now adding more capacity for renewable power each year than coal, natural gas, and oil combined, and we must see that accelerate. And our conclusion then is that we believe that energy is the necessary revolution for the present generation. And not only is it possible, its foundations are already present. Thank you.
And the title of Erin's book in this series on ecology and justice from Orbis, where there's some flyers, her book is Inspired Sustainability, Getting from Ideally Green to Really Green, Imagine Insights from American Faith Communities, and that's forthcoming. So this is a millennial theologian, new thinking. We love to see it. It's not fossilized. It's energized. And in that spirit of new millennials, that's how Donnel Baird introduced himself this morning, I think, for that challenging, wonderful, fresh voice that he has. And as founder of Block Power, he's already shown what he can do, some of which he shared with us this morning. But in addition to 3 years of grassroots community organizing in Brooklyn, a year of working on voter issues with Obama for America, he's done something that is so fantastic and we realize needs to be done in cooperation with the Department of Energy, this campaign, as I understand it, for efficiency of buildings, but to create green jobs for out-of-work people in the out-of-work population, and also partnered with the Washington Interfaith Network to generate $100 million of government investment in underserved communities in the District of Columbia. This is exactly what the Center for Earth Ethics, what this is about, ecology and justice. And please welcome this wonderful new millennial voice. Thank you.
I'd like to start by saying I'm not a theologian, so there's no way to follow that. I was raised in the African American Pentecostal church, and I kind of ran the other way as an adult. So what I would like to talk about is how I feel about ethics as ethics are practiced and implemented in some of the work that I do, if you'll permit. The way I'd like to do that is by offering a little bit of context and background on myself, growing up in an underserved community. I'd like to talk briefly about the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2008-2009. Parts of it worked, parts of it didn't. I want to talk a little bit about fiduciary obligation as a kind of technical, in the way ethics can express itself or not express itself in investment decisions. And talk a little bit about a clean energy project that we're working on in New York City that may or may not be interesting to folks in the room. So totally self-serving talk. I'll keep it under 10 minutes, but if you'll permit me, I think it should be fun. So I grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant back when it was a slum, not like it is now, where there's $2 million brownstones, but it was like an open-air crack den, basically. And I went to pick up my sister from the babysitter one day, and I was 5 and she was 3, and we had an older cousin with us, and we saw a shooting, and a young African-American teenager across the street, drug deal gone bad, shot another young man in the head. I think he survived, but that was super traumatizing, as you might imagine. I lived my whole life afraid of being shot, so I went on to prep school and went on to Duke, but decided to become a faith-based community organizer. And was trained thank you. I didn't know that was still popular. I thought that with Obama's poll ratings going down, well, thanks guys, that's great. So I became a faith-based community organizer and moved back to Bed-Stuy and started organizing in New York City's poorest neighborhood, which is called Brownsville. It's where Mike Tyson's from. It's just a terrible neighborhood. So we spend $1 million per block per year to incarcerate people from each block in this neighborhood. 30% of the young people there go into the criminal justice system at some point. 20% HIV rate, horrible neighborhood. And I worked there for 3 years trying to identify local neighborhood leaders who, who we could work with. So One thing to note was that in the middle of winter, it could be 20 degrees outside, there could be snow on the ground. When you walked around Brownsville, I would notice that there would be these 18-story public housing complexes in Brownsville where thousands of families lived. And even when it was freezing outside, the windows would be open. Couldn't figure it out. So I interviewed some of our community leaders, and they explained that in order to heat up the coldest apartment unit in the building, they had to blast the heat from the boiler throughout the entire building. So some of the apartments were like 60 degrees, some of them were 85 degrees, and the 85-degree apartments would open up their windows to release some of the excess heat. Does that make sense? It's a tremendous waste of money. So the New York City Housing Authority that owns all these public housing complexes spends $500 million a year on energy. We could easily save $100 million a year that could be used to train and hire young people in these neighborhoods to get green jobs and be able to take care of their families. So when Obama announced, he'd been a community organizer with one of the mentors I had. I thought it would be a really great idea if I could work with the Obama campaign. He would win the South Carolina primary, like John Edwards before him. He would become a great Democratic vice presidential nominee to Hillary, and it would be awesome. And it'd be good for all the young children in the neighborhood to kind of see an African-American vice president, which shows how terrible I am at politics. So, which is why I don't do politics anymore. I worked with Obama. We obviously won. My assignment in moving to the stimulus was there's a portion of the Recovery Act that was focused on investing $7 billion in American inner cities to do energy efficiency. And if you think back to 2008, there's 1 million construction workers that have just been laid off, right? They're not doing any new construction in real estate. And so the plan was that we were going to retrain and rehire all these dudes and women to do energy efficiency installations, and much of that was going to be in inner cities. We were going to take the federal government capital that we were investing and leverage it with the Wall Street investment banks to create these green municipal bonds, and it was going to be this public-private partnership that was going to just usher clean energy into the $400 billion inner city market. I mean, none of this happened, right? I mean, it didn't work. Sorry. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. So we were able to create tons of jobs, and we talked about DC and Portland and Milwaukee and other places where we were able to organize these public-private partnerships. But unfortunately, in far too many instances, we were not able to get the private sector involved. Citigroup and Barclays and these folks thought that a commercial real estate collapse was still imminent in 2009, 2010, and were unwilling to make the sorts of investments in partnership with the federal government that would have kind of provided institutional capital to green American inner cities. Everybody still with me? I was working with a coalition of labor union pension funds that had $30 billion in pension assets that, in many ways, I'm sure some of you can relate. Their workers had pension funds, and they wanted to invest to ensure that they could provide capital to pay for the upfront costs of the solar and energy efficiency installation. And in exchange for their investment, not only would they get a financial return on their capital, but they could also control the jobs that were created. And so those green workers that were created could be union jobs. And so I spent 3 years doing that, and it didn't work out because of this technical issue of fiduciary obligation. And at that time, and Vice President Gore briefed me on this in the hallway on the way in, but back in 2010, many institutional investors were very concerned that they would be violating their fiduciary obligation by making climate-related or clean energy investments, right? Let's see some heads nodding. For those of you that don't know, it's the obligation to make the investment of highest return possible when you're a fiduciary. I spent 3 years doing that work. We had some successes, we had lots of failures, but I still saw an opportunity I was committed to finding ways to engaging private sector capital in order to employ the folks in the communities that I care about in inner cities. And saw an opportunity with this new innovation called the Public Benefits Corporation. Have any of you heard of this? So I left my job, went back to Columbia Business School, and started a Public Benefits Corporation, which allows me to take all of the capital that we raise from our investors and invest it according to social and environmental outcomes, as well as financial returns. If I blow the deal and lose everybody's money, I cannot be sued by my investors because I decided to make an investment that prioritized social or environmental impact over financial returns. That said, as Mr. Gore briefed me, there's a ton of data now that in order to function as a great fiduciary, you should be incorporating social and environmental returns. So we started this public benefits corporation called Block Power, focused on aggregating portfolios of clean energy investment among houses of worship in inner cities. We thought that just as the African American church had led during the African American civil rights movement, that the African American church and houses of worship and communities of faith and interfaith networks, just like in the civil rights movement, could lead American inner cities into the kind of green energy revolution that you just talked about. So we have 300 churches around the city, synagogues, mosques that we work with. What's more interesting than that, and I'll take 2 minutes to close here, what's more interesting than that set of projects is, for those of you who are New Yorkers, Con Edison has a failing electricity grid in Brooklyn and Queens that will create rolling blackouts from 2017 to perpetuity unless there is a $1.2 billion investment that is made to replace this aging electrical grid. And the electrical grid exists to pipe fossil fuel produced energy from upstate New York down to New York City, combine it with the 20% of our electrical power that comes from the nuclear plant up at Indian Point, right? And that's how we get electricity. So in order to sustain this kind of fossil fueling, guzzling electric grid infrastructure in New York City here today, Con Edison wants to make a $1.2 billion investment. They're going to make a 10% return on that investment by jacking up all our electricity rates in New York City. Everybody still with me? I'm rounding to a close here. Governor Cuomo, to his credit, and this is a conversation around ethics, and there's been some challenges with ethics in Albany, as many of you know, but what he has done for decades, what he has been able to do is he has ordered Con Edison, instead of making this $1.2 billion investment in the fossil fuel infrastructure of New York City, has ordered them to invest $500 million in local renewable energy and energy efficiency in New York City's poorest neighborhoods. And what we have been able to work to convince them to do, and again, this is in a context of, I'm a young African-American male, there's police shootings around the country, young people of all colors are kind of protesting what's happening with Black Lives Matter, et cetera. In that context, in the poorest zip code in New York City, the governor has agreed to have the electrical and renewable energy and energy infrastructure that will be installed to be 50% owned by the communities of color, the poorest income districts in the city, in partnership with the utility company. It's a pretty cool opportunity. But what I think is really cool about it is, for those of you who are thinking about moving along the spectrum from divestment to reinvestment, right? There are these opportunities to invest institutional capital at scale that has amazing outcomes. Not only are you going to get 10% returns, there's foundations that are investing to take first losses on this project, for example, and so if the deal goes south, there's foundations that are going to make investors whole, so there's very little financial risk, but you have all these great outcomes of being able to create local green jobs here in New York City, investing in a renewable energy infrastructure, divesting from New York State's fossil fuel infrastructure. There's additional outcomes, there's public health benefits, so we have some of the highest asthma rates in the country in New York City. That comes from particulate matters in the buildings. If we do energy efficiency in these buildings, kids are no longer breathing in this air, they're not going to the emergency room, they're not driving up healthcare costs for the hospitals, right? Their parents aren't taking off of work to take them out of school. So there's all these externalities from a project like this that are pretty awesome. And so I just really want to encourage you to kind of, even in our own backyard, there's really incredible investment opportunities for those of you who are looking to continue along the spectrum of divestment to reinvestment and to implement your ethics out in New York City. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And Andrew Cuomo was mentioned here, but his father, Mario Cuomo, this may be a way to get to Andrew, was a huge supporter of the thought of Teilhard de Chardin, which influenced Thomas Berry about we're part of a vast evolving universe. And Mario Cuomo said his conversion to public service came because of his reading Teilhard de Chardin. We have our annual meetings on Teilhard right here in this room, so I just want to evoke that spirit, especially in light of our next speaker, because she has been involved in a whole range of issues, but the connection to the Albany government is that she has been involved in the protests against fracking and organizing in upstate New York, which led to a very historic decision in December 2014 of banning fracking in New York. Betty, as you know, is a member of the Onondaga Nation, a nation which has kept its culture alive in so many ways, and we're so pleased to have Tadadaho here and Erin Lyons as well. This is a nation that brings us so much wisdom, compassion, intelligence, fierce energy, but also, starting this coming week, a historic moment for their nation, and that is the lacrosse events of 13 countries coming together in upstate New York to celebrate the sport that they invented and Erin Lyons helped to promote, lacrosse. Now, I want to also just underscore Betty's many accomplishments very briefly, but she is president and executive director of the American Indian Law Alliance. She has a beautiful name in her own language, Small Sky. I think small sky, but big power. She has also done work with the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples here in the United Nations, and she coordinates the opening ceremonies of that, which I think is really quite extraordinary. She's on the board here at the Center for Earth Ethics, and I think, again, this panel represents the wonderful synergies of theology, investment, and indigenous perspectives. Also from a law perspective, I want to give that shout out. Wonderful synergies. Please welcome Betty Lyons.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I just wanted to tell you my indigenous name, my Unguhui name is Gainha'a. It means small sky, like she said, so that kind of gives you an understanding of how connected we are to Earth. All of my children's names, I'm from the Onondaga Nation Snipe Clan. I'm a citizen of that nation, and I am so very proud of my nation and our leadership that are here. My husband, also Erin Lyons, my uncle, who I don't know where he went. He'll be back. But to that, I wanted to say how important all of this is, and to thank the Center for the Earth Ethics, especially Corinna. I cannot tell you enough how amazing your work is and how it's touching so many lives. I got choked up. I have goosebumps about it. Your work is amazing, and Shay as well. I think he's here somewhere. You know, at a time when it's most needed, you're bridging that gap where people don't know how to connect to one another in these issues because we may come from different socioeconomical places, right? So people don't know how to reach out and shake somebody's hand. And this is a beautiful way that you've brought this all together. So I just wanted to thank you for that. So first, what I want to do is I wanted to start off by saying, I wanted to give a quote from my uncle, who is, I don't know where he is. Anyway, but he's an amazing speaker, and it just really spoke to me. It said, "When we walk upon Mother Earth, we always plant our feet carefully because we know the faces of our future generations are looking up at us from beneath the ground. We never forget them. In the absence of the sacred, nothing is sacred. Everything is for sale. And it's no more evident than the city of New York." I mean, you can't turn and look to see a skyscraper, some concrete. There's no grass, there's no trees. And unfortunately, we truly believe that that comes from many hundreds of years of this thought process of, using the earth for your benefit and never giving back to it. And so our government, the Onondaga Nation, and all of our teachings are so different from that. And I believe that all religions have the same mandate, that it's all our collective responsibilities to take care of Mother Earth and to do the things necessary to protect her, as her life is so important to ours, right? Our mandate as Indigenous peoples is that we speak for those things that cannot speak for themselves. That's the air, the water, the fish, the animals, everything that's around you, all beings on this earth. And right now, we are in a crisis. We are in a crisis state. And the earth, Mother Earth is screaming. She's screaming. And all of these animals and beings, the air, the water, they're all screaming and no one is listening. And so for us, it is our mandate to scream for her. And so that's why I'm here today. It is so important that we all look and see what we can do individually, locally, and then globally. First, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Onondaga Lake. And, as he was talking, Donnel was saying about the ethics of, and the economy of Earth and all of those, how it affects all aspects of our life. Onondaga Lake to us was our sacred lake. It was given to us by our peacemaker came and brought our message on the shores of Onondaga Lake, and is the second most polluted lake in the entire world. It's still a Superfund site, even though they've dumped $4 million into fixing it. There still remains 9 million cubic feet of toxic waste at the bottom of this sacred lake. And so recently, we organized a demonstration and brought our children to the shores of Onondaga Lake because they were going to do a swim, a celebrity swim in this sacred lake of ours, to show that it was clean to everyone, all the area towns, the city. I mean, these were politicians. It was so upsetting. And so there are our children were, including my children, holding signs, and people were saying things to them. And they jump in this lake, and they're throwing a beach ball around. They're on rafts, they're on these floaty things, like it's a joke, right? And I thought, how unfortunate that they're missing that connection, right? That they're missing that mandate that we've all been given to care for Mother Earth. Then I'll move on. I truly believe, though, that if we were to stop and get this lake fixed, and they were to spend the proper money in cleaning it up, the economic revenue from that lake, there's a sustainable way to live with the lake. The economic revenue that would come from that lake and for everybody's enjoyment would be paramount. And I'm thinking to myself, what's missing? Like, what piece of the puzzle don't they get, But unfortunately, I think it's a value system. I think that we're lacking in a serious way when it comes to teaching our children and our communities about a value system. Water is going to be probably the most precious element in the world in the next 20 years. People are going to be fighting over this. They're going to be killing each other over it. I mean, it is our time to act now. As she was stating, that we had started the ban on fracking. This is about 8 years ago. And really, how it started was that the tributary that comes into the creek, that feeds into our watersheds, is not on the nation territory. And so we don't have control over that, right? And so we thought, how are we going to get people energized in this effort to protect this water, this, that we need for life, right? Water is life. So after thinking a while about it, we have the best attorney on the planet, Joseph Heath, who we tease and say that he's part Onondaga. We sent him into communities. We had him organize some meetings to get together on a grassroots level to try to get people together to see the importance of what's happening here and to ban it. How awful this extractive industry is. how it uses up all the fresh water. You know, where do they take the toxic waste that comes from the pollutants that they're putting in the water, and all of those effects. And it was hard because for us to go into communities, no one's going to listen to me, you know. I mean, literally at one meeting that we had at Onondaga Community College, I was referred to as the little Indian girl, which was, I said, I thought, okay, like, you know, you're battling an entire thought process, an entire mentality. So we had to have him set these meetings up, and then we would show up. Imagine their shock, horror, and dismay when the Onondaga Nation showed up and said, hi, you know, we're going to pull up a seat and let's talk about this. But what was also amazing was our attorney had the insight to see, or foresight to see, that we needed somebody else. So he picked probably the most right-wing person on the planet, I mean, all the way to the right. I mean, he carried a Constitution in his back pocket, like, you know. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So he sat there and he was talking about how it affected him and his land, and he was the one that connected with everybody in that audience. He was this, you know, your average, typical white male that was talking about how this affected him, his farmland, his watershed, and people started to change their mind. You know, group after group after group, and finally we became this cohesive unit and visited the governor's office many times. He wasn't real happy to see us, but we're successful in the ban on fracking. I mean, it's an amazing accomplishment, and I really truly believe that if we all work together on this grassroots level and we stop seeing each other in these stations in life, right? We're all human beings, you know, that's basic and foremost. And that if we just reached our hand out to the person next to us and said, how can we propel this forward? How can we make this work? That it would move forward. It would move a lot faster. And that's part of what I believe Crenna is doing, and which is, you know, truly amazing. So the last thing that I wanted to say to you, or to ask all of you, is how much is your water worth to you? I mean, can you put a monetary dollar amount on water, on what you're drinking all here today? I mean, is there a price tag on it, really? Because without it, there is no life. And I truly believe that until we stop hurting our mother. You know, Mother Earth is not just a metaphor or a saying that we use. She is our mother. So I'm going to ask all of you, how do you treat your mother? I mean, think about that. How do you treat your mother? Do you take all of her resources from her? You know, do you pollute her on a daily basis? No, most certainly not, right? So why would you do that to your Mother Earth? We need her to be able to live our own lives and to grow from there, and for our seventh generation to come. It's so paramount and important. So I want to thank you for inviting me here to speak today, and I appreciate your time, and I think this is great. And I just wanted to say, Vice President Al Gore, please, for your people, run for the presidency of the United States. Please. I mean, whatever. Yes. No. We need to have, there needs to be, I believe, you know, our nation has, you know, a very strong moral and ethical way of ruling and of leading our people, and this is what your people need. I mean, honestly, I don't vote because I'm a part of my own nation and we have our own government, but, you know, please encourage him to do so, because this planet, you know, we can't take much more of this, and right? And lastly, I would like to say about the carbon emissions that you were speaking of earlier. It's not just carbon anymore that we have to worry about. It's methane from hydrofracking. And we went to, we heard a NASA report that came out that the United States is the highest producer of methane gas that is accelerating climate change to the point that if it is not, something is not done about it within the next 10 years, all of our lives are going to change forever. And my child's life and my grandchildren's, and to me, it means something, and it should mean something to all of you when you think of it that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, I want to say what we have here is a wonderful illustration of what I was trying to suggest this morning. We need new principles, ethical principles. We need strategies, economic strategies, and we need the tactics, don't we, of this amazing grassroots work. Principles, strategies, and tactics, and we can see that interconnection. We can make it. And also, Francis Beinecke said, Al Gore has done so much behind the scenes, so we want to thank him for that. And again. Okay, we have time for 2 questions, briefly and to the point. Oh, good, they were just so stimulating. That's fine then. We will move on to hear. Oh, was there one over there? Who? Yeah, that's fine. And then we'll move to the next panel downstairs.
I would just like to thank Donnel and Betty for their impassioned and active example that you're showing and the enormous, incredible achievements you've had. But it was the last statement you said, how do we treat our own mothers? I think maybe many of us take our mothers for granted, and how we do that with the earth too, and we can no longer do that. So how do we build that spirit of gratitude and recognition for each and every gift that our Mother Earth gives us, and cease taking it for granted and build it back? So thank you for pointing that out.
I'd just like to say to both of you, the most encouraging and inspiring part of my work is the work that the Catholic Archdiocese in Manhattan and the Bronx is doing now to make sure that 100% of their property responds to the Pope's encyclical and does solar and energy efficiency to bring down pollution and carbon emissions. And I just think that's an extraordinary commitment from the New York Archdiocese, and it is very inspiring to us, and thankfully to other denominations. So the Methodists are kind of like, oh, what's going on with the Catholics? We want to get involved, and vice versa, so that's great. And as a new parent, I just welcomed my first child 4 weeks ago, and yeah, thank you. It was mostly my wife, it wasn't me. So. But I did get permission to be here today because this was so important. It really spoke to me as a new dad, to think that the actions that we take now have such lasting implications for our loved ones. That's an extraordinary responsibility, and just thank you for speaking to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Erin. I want to say that I think it's so refreshing that, the Catholic Church, and listening to you, that how they're reinvigorated and talking about earth issues in an ethical way. It's so important that all religions look into, the basic mandates of their religion to do that, because they all have that in them. So, it's just nice to hear that, because for us, as you know, it's hard for us with the doctrine of discovery and papal bulls. That affected all of our lives, indigenous people's lives for so long. It's refreshing to hear that. And to Donnel, I want to say how important what you had to say about, the economy and moving this along, being clean, having sustainable energy doesn't have to be, it can be profitable. Everyone can enjoy it. It can be done in a responsible way. And I think that's the point that people miss. They think, having ethics towards the earth means, you have to give something up, or you have to, you're going to lose out on something. We all gain from that. We all gain from that. So thank you very much.
So thank you. And I just want to say one final thing about the Forum on Religion and Ecology that wants to work closely and is with the Center for Earth Ethics. But if you take the little brochure downstairs, there are statements of all the world's religions now on this issue. There are many books. There are statements on climate change, as Kusamita referred to them. A huge amount of resources. That website is about 20 years in the making. But also there are engaged projects listed there under all the world's religions. And we would be so happy to list your projects and get them out. There's a newsletter that goes out to about 10,000 people and so on. So that's part of the follow-through here. And I'm really delighted to thank again this extraordinary panel. Thank you very much.